Okay, so we're on air, and I would like to thank everyone. We're in the 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time time slot for Make a Difference PD. And thanks to everybody who is watching, and also to Aiden Turner, who is from Thunder Bay. He's a grade 4 teacher, 5 teacher this year, Aiden. 5 teacher at St. Vincent School. And we have Mike Filippitti. He's a Google Innovator and principal at St. Ignatius School. We have Mark Barnes, who is the publisher of many Hack Learning Series books. He's actually holding up the mug. Cheers, Mark. And we also have Jennifer King from Ottawa Catholic. And so the idea for my presentation is simply, I want to share how I've made a difference by transforming my classroom from a very traditional classroom. I've been in my actual same classroom for 20 years at St. Elizabeth School. And over time, I've worked on transforming it into what I think is now a very student-centered, dynamic learning environment that's connected, but thoughtfully connected throughout the world. So my idea of a connected classroom, when I speak at a conference or I challenge other people, is what is being connected? What does a connected classroom look like to you? And Jen was in my workshop last weekend, and a lot of people talk about technology and computers and everything else and being global citizens, but I think it's really important that when we're connected, we have to have our kids understand that you need to know yourself first. Your most important connection is you. It's yourself. I think in this very connected age, if we don't have kids who have a very good sense of self, they're going to do a poor job connecting beyond themselves. And then it's their peers. They have to be connected with their peers, their family first. So those are our most important connections, or the connections that are close to us. And then building our connections within our community, making a difference within our community, and then from there, building connections beyond. And we have the power and the technology to do that. So teaching our kids how to use this technology, how we're connecting right now for good. So back to my learning environment, I think really we spend a third of our day in our classrooms, and so do our students. And just as our house, we want to have it efficient, we want to have it effective, and we want to have it comfortable. And so it's about building a classroom for the kids. And I think I finally, after 20 years, I'm in a place, in a space, and I believe my kids as well, because I get feedback from them, and we build it together. Rami is joining us now. Welcome, Rami. We can see you. Rami. Good to have you, Rami. We're just broadcasting live now. I'm just going to have you mute your mic, and
Okay.
glad to have you. And so what we'll do, I'm just going to share with Rami and catch him up a little bit, is I'm going to present on how I've kind of transformed my classroom, and then I'm going to have our panel simply give their input. They can ask questions. I know you're out there on Twitter and people are viewing as well. Feel free to ask questions or share what makes a difference for you in your classroom, how one idea that's transformed your learning space. All right. And if you're on Twitter as well, feel free to contribute through the MADPD hashtag as to how you've changed your learning environment, because that's what it's all about. Our Make a Difference PD Day is sharing our best ideas for the good of our students, really. So I think collectively we're better for our kids. All right, so I am going to actually share my screen. And I'm assuming I'll get a thumbs up from Aiden, maybe, if you can see my screen, Aiden. Okay, perfect. So what I'd like to do is just simply bring you into my classroom and give you a 360-degree view of my classroom. It's a 1-minute video, and it gives you an idea of the structure of my classroom. And then what I'll do is I've actually screenshotted a few images or a few ideas within my classroom that I'd just like to expand on a little bit. A few resources that helps us to connect, and then we'll open it up to the panel. So here's. Okay, so that is a quick 360-degree view of my classroom. And so what has helped to make a difference in my classroom? And I think, first of all, it's about having a mantra, having a common theme, or, you know, an overlying, who are we? And for us, it's we're difference makers. We look for ways to make a difference for ourselves, for others, and, you know, then to hopefully affect change, positive change in the world. This one, for me, has made a difference for my kids. Again, I used to, you know, have a learning environment where the kids were in rows. There was some opportunity, obviously, for group work, but now it's quite dynamic. I actually can't imagine having my kids sit in the same seat for 300 minutes of the day without being able to move. So, you know, we have the traditional kind of setup. Certainly the kids aren't in rows, but they're in desks. And then this back on the left-hand corner is just my back counter. And I just created a stand-up workspace for my kids that they have the opportunity to go and work at. I've also acquired a couple of stand-up desks in different forms. You just have to be creative and look and see what you use. Obviously, we're limited by a zero budget, really, but just have to kind of look around and be creative in how you might find different opportunities. And then the big one for me was the mats. Instead of a rug, the mats allow kids to move from space to space, and those mats can just be found in your school gymnasium storage room that probably are not often used. So, you know, I was reluctant to kind of change up my learning space because I was kind of letting go of control, but you're giving control to the kids. And when you give control to the kids, they're making those choices. They're self-regulating and deciding where, you know, they think they might work best for that day. So honestly, classroom management is not an issue in my classroom. Well, it's always an issue, but it's something I would say it's not an issue, but it makes managing a classroom much easier when you're actually teaching and allowing the kids to self-regulate. The buckets for me, there's nothing in those desks. Desks were inside storage areas of desks are, in my opinion, and I've done it for 18 years, very inefficient. Put everything in a bucket, have the kids organize it, and then that allows them the freedom of movement, and they take all their materials with them. All right, that looks like a whiteboard, but what it is if you see in the upper left-hand corner, found this product called Idea Paint. And I found it through being connected with Paul McGuire on Twitter. And he just tweeted out one day, and I've actually transformed all of my blackboards into whiteboards by painting, by using this paint. Not only have I done that, but I also have long whiteboards. I've put the paint up between the windows in my classroom, and that's kind of created word walls for us as well. clotheslines. So we have chart paper, and we have our learning goals and success criteria, and you want to be able to refer to it, but you also want to be able to store it. But how does that happen? Set up a clothesline, close pins, and you're good to go. Game changers, for sure. 2 resources. Having kids meditate, for me, I never thought I would do meditation in my classroom, but Calm Classrooms is an unbelievable resource. It's even a great resource just for having nice calming music, or when my kids are independent reading or working. There's so many different themes that you can put up on your smartboard and just create a nice calm environment. And then there's also the guided meditation. It's also important that our kids are moving. So GoNoodle is a fantastic resource for allowing your students. It's guided, it's fun, and it gets the kids moving. And sometimes a 5 minutes break, moving, and getting up and running or stretching or what have you, actually adds a lot to your day. You give your kids a 5-minute break, but it pays dividends throughout the course of the school day. Twitter, if you are connected on Twitter, you see the power of using social media in your classroom. And I can't believe, again, that I would ever be saying that I was using social media, number 1, and 2, and within my classroom. But I think it's important that as we begin to connect, that we model how to use the powerful tool of social media to make thoughtful decisions about how we're sharing not only our voice, but modeling, what we're doing. And I think, if we model that, really, if we have something good to say, think about it and possibly share it via social media. If you have something negative to say, or something that might be dealt better face to face, then talk to people. I have a blog as well. I share a lot of what we do with other teachers, and importantly, I have a parents and kids page, and I connect and share with parents kind of what we're doing. And I don't really have homework anymore. I call it home share, where the kids go home and there's just little springboards within that parents and kids page to continue the conversation beyond our classroom. So it's really important that we're connecting with our kids. And then exploring by the seat of your pants, thanks to Joe Grabowski, used to feel kind of guilty. With my wife being a teacher as well, my little guy has traveled to more places than I can count now. And you come back after a March break and start talking about the places you've gone. And a lot of our kids haven't had the chance to travel beyond the borders of our provinces at best. Exploring by the seat of your pants allows you to bring the world to your classroom. And that is just an image. I have blogged about my transform learning environment, and just kind of elaborated on each of kind of the ideas or the resources that have helped to transform my classroom. And that is 14 minutes. So I think what I would love to do now is stop sharing my screen and go to our panel. All right, so we're back. Rami, welcome. Glad you could join us.
Thank you, Aman. Can you hear me now?
Can. Would you like to?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, Rami, if you want to introduce yourself, and then maybe you can lead with either a question or a comment.
Well, my name is Rami Amin. I've been a lecturer for nearly 10 years now. I'm into technology and education and technology for many years. I love the settings. your classroom looks really lively and up to date. I would like to be a student there. What came to my mind? How do you manage all these platforms together? You know, because you're using a mixture of technology. How do you handle this every day?
As far as the platforms such as Twitter and blogging and whatnot, I think it's
Go Noodle, you said you mentioned this for meditation.
yeah.
And the whiteboards. Do you take any snapshots? Do you save them? I'm an Evernote community leader, so do you save anything there? Or on OneNote?
Oh, do I save anything? Yeah, how do I manage? I think
I'm sure you and your students are creating, you know, many lovely stuff. But do you keep track of all those, or it just finishes with the end of the class?
yeah, you know what, Remy? I'm not quite understanding the question just because your reception is a little bit off too. If you could, would you type in your question in the messages?
I will.
Okay, thanks, Remy.
I will.
Okay, and I'll address that.
Thank you.
Anybody like to comment or ask a question?
So one way that I've transformed my classroom, and I found from when I was in school, and I always remember the teacher being behind the desk as an authoritarian in the classroom. So one thing that I've done is I've ditched my desk. I don't have a spot. I'm in amongst the kids all day long. There's no spot for me to sit behind to be the authoritarian in the class. I think that they should be the leaders in the classroom. They should be the ones who are leading what is going on in my classroom. And I change that every year because the kids are different every year as well. I find that them coming into a welcoming environment and not having that sort of, there's the teacher's desk, oh, watch out, that's where the teacher's desk is kind of attitude to the classroom has been made my classroom a lot more welcoming and inviting and not so intimidating, if you will, to the kids. Yeah.
Thanks, Aiden. Really good point. I do still have a desk in my classroom, but it's really where my laptops sit, and I was lucky enough to get a stand-up desk on wheels, and that really works for me. But you know what? I find my kids use my stand-up desk more than I do because I'm always kind of moving as well. So that's not my go-to. I thought it would be. Yeah. I've had our principal actually borrow our stand-up desk many times, and he uses it. And I know many administrators whose desk is actually a stand-up desk on wheels, and their office is the classrooms, which I think is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you should bring that up because I did the same thing when I transferred to a different school this year. And when I did so, the first thing I did was chuck the old school desk, mostly for space purposes, because the furniture from school to school changes, right? So I was at a relatively, well, not relatively, extremely new school. So the furniture was more modular. It wasn't my favorite, I have to say. I was able to actually request what type of table or what size of table I wanted for my students. So the first thing I did was I got rid of my desk, and at my previous school we used something called a media cart, which is a less fancy way of saying, and a far more reasonable in terms of price, way of saying a stand-up desk, but it is on wheels, and it is solely for my laptop that's connected to the smartphone. But it is really a student workspace too. It's just another alternative. I can connect so many ways with what Peter is doing in his classroom and what has happened in mine, mostly because I'm picking up all these ideas on Twitter and from other people around the world, which is amazing. I think the coolest thing that I've noticed that's happened is that parents are usually the first to comment on how different it is. So when they're coming into the classroom, if they're coming in for a conference or a meeting, what have you, the first thing I can see their eyes doing is scanning the room. And it's almost with a little bit of anxiety, as in, you know, what is happening in this space that, you know, the teacher doesn't have a desk. That's usually the first comment is, well, where do you go? Right? Like, where do I go? Like, I have a spot, right? And I said, well, I kind of go everywhere, you know, just like your students. And then there'll be questions about, well, you know, I don't understand, what are the tables at the back for? I don't have a budget. Most of us don't. So it does become a matter of begging and borrowing and stealing and driving up and down, streets where people are pitching stuff on yard sale days, right? But I found a few things online. Thank gosh for Amazon. And one thing that I've done is I've taken, they're called bed risers. So I was thinking back to my university dorm days where I would lift my own dorm bed with the old school milk crates, you remember? To lift it so I could have space underneath. And I thought, well, those things are really hard to track down and they're not particularly safe. So what can I do so that I can, cross all my T's and dot all my I's in terms of safety as well? So I found bed risers on Amazon, and I think for 4, they were around $16. And basically I was able to take sort of conference table sized tables and lift them so they became stand-up tables. I was able to find a couple of things in terms of, again, connecting with Peter and keeping bodies moving. I found a colleague who said, I have this sort of elliptical kind of trainer. Now, it's really just the foot, like the pedal portion. So I stick that underneath in one of the stand-up tables. So you'll see kids in my class standing up and their legs are moving, but they're still working. So again, it was free, and it works. And again, offering all those different types of flexible seating options. I love the picture of the mat here. I couldn't stop laughing. So the kid that was completely laid out on the floor. We have
sleeping.
Yeah, I'm going to go back and grab some of those mats because grade 6 students are long, right? Like they're tall. So I've just been using like carpets and mats and that kind of thing, just so they can move out into the hallway and such. The other thing that I use are wobble boards. So if you happen to have any connections with anyone at a local gym, or even this connection was made with a business here in Ottawa, and I just happened to be married to the guy that owns the business, and he was able to give me some of these wobble boards where they're basically sort of a semicircular sort of shape, and they're in the gyms, right? And I was able to grab a couple of those that his employees were no longer using with their stand-up desks. So I said, well, I'll take them. The thing that I find the most interesting is that once the novelty is over in terms of classroom management, once the novelty is gone, so my students were completely green when it came to being in an environment like this, a learning environment. So there was a lot of excitement at the beginning, and there was some silliness and whatnot, right? But in terms of classroom management, they completely self-regulate. The kids that need to use them, use them. So those yoga balls that I build these PVC pipes for are no longer an interest anymore. So we don't have the kids jumping, a meter into the air. For my American friends, a little bit, higher. Anyways, it's just, it's been a completely interesting year for me in terms of my own observations and professional growth. In terms of what I've seen, I'll stop in a second. I'm really excited about this though. What I've noticed and what I've heard from my colleagues, because the students are new to me, so when we're talking about variables in terms of tracking behaviors and whatnot, they're completely new to me. I'm new to them. The learning space is completely new to them. But what I'm hearing from colleagues is that the behavior or the amount of behaviors or incidents that are happening both in the classroom, within the school hallways, and outside on the yard are reducing. And I'd like to believe that it's because they're now given that ownership of choosing how they learn, when they learn, and in what space they're learning in. It empowers them as learners, and I'm preparing them for grade 7. I hope they'll be good to go. So I'll get off of my little soap stand there.
Thanks, Jen. No, that was fantastic. Mark or Mike?
Sure, I can jump in. I think learning spaces, I've been in your classroom, Peter, and I think there's just so much going on, and students are so aware of what their expectations are in the day. That in itself eliminates any classroom management issues. They're excited to be there. And from an administrative standpoint, my thought has always been when a student wakes up in the morning, their first thought has to be an excitement to go to school and learn. And they definitely have that in your classroom. From the high school setting, we've really seen a switch with Google Classroom. It's not just something some classrooms have. It's pretty much the standard at this point. And it allows students to totally stay connected. Sharing of assignments, we're seeing that as the norm. So learning spaces are no longer constrained to the 75-minute class. I can remember when I was in high school, which was a long time ago, you had to arrange if there was ever any group assignments on who's going to do what, and most of your time was just spent logistically before you could create things. And now, because we're in the Google environment, and I know there are other environments as well that are similar, it's very easy for people to collaborate, not just within the confines of who's in your class, but worldwide. So connecting with experts, sharing things provincially or nationally or internationally. So collaboration is there. And then that's just from the student standpoint. From the teacher standpoint, having a network of friends. And before this started, I remember we were talking about who here we knew personally and who here we haven't met in person. And sometimes you're not even sure, because our network, our learning networks have expanded from what, I started teaching in the mid-late 90s, and you would have, 2 or 3 people who were close, and that was your professional learning network. And it's literally thousands at this point. And you'll run into people and you'll recognize them, and then you'll realize, oh, I follow them on Twitter and I've shared documents with them. It's not just following them, we've interacted. So as far as our learning spaces, they've changed immensely, and I think it's just beneficial to everybody. So that's my 2 cents, and I'll maybe turn it over to Mark.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with what you're saying. You guys hearing me?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and you know what I'm seeing? I jotted some notes down during your presentation, Peter, that I felt like I was taking a step back in time. I've been out of the classroom now for about 3 years, but I felt like I was going back in time because I saw so many things that I had learned over time that, really helped kids engage. The bean bags, your tables in pods. It's a little busy, but it's a good busy. And what I'm hearing a lot of people say, talking about parents and what other colleagues and people see, sometimes there's a fear there. And I think, and we've seen the questions too, but how do you manage all of that? And it's sort of chaotic. And I got that all the time. But I think what we're hearing, and I've heard a lot of people say it in here, is that it's so engaging for kids that it sort of manages itself. There's some upfront work. I think one thing to make really clear for people watching this is, there's a lot of coaching involved with kids up front. When you put kids into an environment like this that they may not be used to, where there's a little bit of chaos in the room. And there's different places, you mentioned self-regulating. I love that. I wrote that down. You have to teach kids how to do that though. There is a little bit of coaching involved. And I think that's a really important thing for people who are watching this to get, is you have to work with kids, and you just have to talk to them about it. It isn't really totally direct instruction, but it's a lot of conversation about boundaries, where you say, if we're in this environment where you've got kids in the back of the room doing something different, and kids over here in bean bags or laying down on mats or bouncing on balls, what does that look like to other people, and how can we do it efficiently? And what I found is that kids are really good at fleshing that out. When you ask, even 7th graders, I taught middle school for most of my career. And when you ask those kids, what are issues here that we have to face? It's amazing how they get that. They'll say, kids will say, well, if we've got a group of people in the back of the room and we're working on something that's different from other people, we have to be careful not to be too noisy to disrupt what they're doing. Or, sometimes there's even instruction, as walking around the room, you may be interacting with kids. We don't typically, as educators, think of that as instruction, but it certainly is instructional. And kids get that. You know, they say, well, we have to self-monitor too. We have to be quiet. There's times we can be loud, whatever. So I think that's important for people to get. It's not something that happens overnight. If kids aren't used to this kind of environment and you put them in it, they don't magically get it. And they don't get it after a day or even a week. It's something you have to constantly talk about, but it's really amazing. And they do get really good at self-regulating eventually. And I found that, disruption and any kind of behavior issues really reduced eventually down to pretty much nothing. Because the other thing is, and I don't know how much this is emphasized, but I certainly see it in your presentation. I hear it in what people are saying, is that there's so much going on and transitioning from one thing to another. The kids are excited about learning, and when they're excited about learning, they're less interested in being disruptive. And I know that in a traditional class, teachers really struggle with that letting go. But when you do, and you coach kids how to do that constantly, and you give them things to do, the technology you're talking about, the blogging and Twitter and all kinds of different things. Google, Mike mentioned, the stuff going on in Google now, in Google Classroom is incredible. So I think that when kids are busy, they're interacting, they're working on different things, they feel ownership, that I own the learning, I can decide, man, they get excited about it. So thanks for taking me back in time to my class, because the last few years I feel like it looked a lot like yours, and that's when it was the best for me in almost 25 years of teaching. The last few really were the best.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks to everybody for your rich input and comments and suggestions. Rami, for me, what we use, like Mike has alluded to, is Google Classroom, and the kids have, which is incredible. They will always have access to their documents, and so I'm having my kids build their e-portfolios through slides and whatnot as well. So talk about powerful, and then being connected and being able to share then your work with your grade 7 teacher and your grade 8 teacher, and we should be able to have a documentation of our kids learning now, right from whenever they start using, our Google apps. And just getting back to what Mark said, you're right, Mark. It is all about coaching. I think we are their life coaches. We're more than teachers, and we're not just delivering content. I think we're shaping kids, which means then that we're shaping the future, and we need to teach these kids, our future, how to make decisions and how to self-regulate. We can't, having the kids in rows, and that just, those are not the kids we need anymore. We need kids to be asking deep, rich questions. We need to be having them create and to problem solve. It's all of those things. But if you came into my classroom, what I am is, I do like my structure. I've let that go, but you look at the classroom, but what the kids do have is a home base. Their home base is one of the chairs, one of the desks with their buckets that they come in. Their buckets are on their desk at the beginning of the day. It's their home base. So how I got my kids then making powerful choices, some of them weren't. They were always gravitating to their friends. Well, I can't work with Aiden very well in any situation because he and I are just going to talk about poker and everything else other than probably what we're supposed to be doing. So you know what? I'm probably not going to choose to sit beside Aiden if we're going to a conference and I need to get anything done. I know that. So it's a matter of teaching kids how to make decisions. And so at the beginning of the year, it's about modeling. I had 7 or 8 kids start at your home base. Okay, this kid is making a really good decision. Look, he's chosen to work there. Why are you standing up today? And why have you chosen this space? Okay, let a couple other kids go. The rest are staying at their home base, right? And then So they always have that home base. And for Mike, and now it's just, they come in, they have their home base. Mr. C, man, you don't have to ask to move. This is your learning space. Working with a group of teachers here in Seattle, and we're picking our own learning spaces. Some of them are working, some of us are working outside, some of us are standing up, some of it, and we're making those choices. So we need to start teaching our kids to make those choices that are best for them. Yeah, so, and in my classroom too, I think a couple of my famous ones are, how are you going to solve your problem? Figure it out. And the kids, they've come from asking me 1,000 questions in a day to they're problem solving. They're helping each other figure out the problems. They come to me, I know then, absolutely. But for the most part, my job is to walk around, listen, and give feedback. They come to me with a question. They're asking me to help solve their problem, but they've already tried to do it themselves. So that's important. And then, yeah, I think as well, like my kids know in a learning environment, I want you to have fun, but it's not, there's a time and a place for silly, but it's a learning environment. So have fun, but take your job and your learning seriously. And yeah, I think you're right. The classroom management is different now. We need to, instead of trying to keep a lid on the pot, and what that's like in a traditional classroom, and as the day kind of progresses, you're just keeping the lid on the pot. Now it's different. It's not much difference between first block and third block, because they're moving. They're able to make those decisions themselves. Any last or final thoughts or questions?
I'll just chime in for a second, and Peter can speak to this too, because his son's teacher is actually one of the lead teachers with this project in our school board, and we're talking about self-regulation of students. And one of the things we just talked about with this group of teachers from our school board was de-stressing your classroom. Kids are under an incredible amount of stress these days, both within the school, at home, with their peers. There's a growing amount of stress on kids. So we had a PD with Jen and Susan and Peter and John last week in our school. And some of the things that they brought forward about de-stressing your classroom, I think just really hit home to me, because you don't even realize how much stress you are under as a teacher, and things that in your classroom that are just creating that stress for you and for your kids. So, and like choice is a huge thing, giving kids a choice, letting them decide how they want to sit, where they want to sit, if they want to lie down, like in Peter's classroom, do they want to stand up? Lights off in the classroom is a huge one for me. I have a big, giant, beautiful window in my classroom. The blind is up 24/7 and the lights are off. And the kids have no problem, and no one ever says, Mr. Turner, I can't see. Natural light, those gross fluorescent lights that we have in our buildings are just, they're stressful on kids. They just put, yeah. So I think that's a big movement. And I think more and more educators and administrators should be thinking about that, as well as like not just the curriculum or the content aspect of classrooms, stress levels, and as well as we do, it's called Mindfulness Thursdays in our classroom, where we have a counselor and she comes in and she does one announcement every Thursday, and the whole school gets centered for about 2 to 3 minutes over the PA system. And even those kids that sometimes don't buy in, they're in it. Their eyes are closed. They're doing deep breathing, and they all come out just different. It's amazing. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Aidan, and thank you again. I think we'll stop the broadcast soon. I want to thank Jen and Mark and Mike and Aidan and Remy for joining in this great, rich conversation and making a difference for our students. So thanks to everybody, and we'll stop the broadcast. You guys want to stick around, you're welcome to for a sec.